What's up and how are you? Sean Nevels, educator, coach, lifetime Shape America member, and host for this new series, the Shape America Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion podcast. And if you haven't got a chance yet, make sure you pay attention to episode 0 up on YouTube and any way you follow your podcast to kind of get yourself ready and started for what's going to be one of many conversations. And to get us started today, we have on with us from Montgomery County Public Schools in Maryland, Kenneth M. Smith. Before I get into it, a lot of big accolades here. A couple I do want to point to is Kenny, as he goes by, is a national board certified teacher and also was voted Montgomery County's Washington Post Teacher of the Year in 2018. So to bring him on and really get our conversation started, particularly around social justice, I would like to welcome Kenneth M. Smith. Kenny, how are you, sir?
I'm all right, baby. How you doing, Sean?
I'm good.
All
Time
right.
to have some impactful conversations. So we'll just
Yes,
get
indeed.
straight into it. So Kenny, tell the audience a little bit about yourself.
Sure. So again, I teach in Maryland, the largest school district in Maryland. I teach social studies, and there's classes that I teach in social studies. I teach sociology, African American studies, in a class that I designed for the county, HipHop History and Culture. So those are the 3 classes I teach currently, but in the past I've taught U.S. history and world history.
And a lot more in there that you've done, but we'll get to that here a little later.
Yeah,
So to get this conversation started and to really kick off this series, we have Kenny on to talk about social justice. And, you know, the number one question is, particularly Kenny, for you and how it works in your space, is what is social justice?
Yeah, so for me, and I love this question because we can read about social justice, intellectually, talk about it in academia, but myself as a practitioner in the classroom every day, I'm always concerned and trying to find out, where does theory meet practice, right? And all these things we learn about what social justice is. How does it look like in the classroom, in the real world, when you're working with students? And so for me, I break it down. I try to keep it simple because I know that when I do my teacher education, when I'm teaching my students, I want it to be very practical. So there are 3 main components for me when I think about social justice. And number 1 is the idea of equity, that I want all students to see themselves in my classes, right? I want them to be, and all my classes are student-centered. So I always think about where they are. I want them to feel as if they see themselves in the classroom, and I want to give them the permission, to question me at times when either the information I say is incorrect according to them, or they want more information. So that idea of equity is very important to me in terms of social justice. The next thing, of course, and this is, I say probably one of the most challenging aspects of social justice, is the idea of agency. And I mean agency for the students. And with agency for the students, that means developing their voice. And we've been hearing a lot about student voice over the past few years, but it's one thing to talk about it. It's a different thing to put it into practice, because when you talk about student voice, you also have to realize that you're giving them the opportunity to question things that you say and do. And I try to give my students that space to feel comfortable, to be able to have these tough conversations with me. So there's the idea of equity, there's agency, and then finally, it's developing their critical consciousness. And when you develop their critical consciousness, you want them to be socially aware of their environment, who they are, where they are, how are they shaped, what communities do they come from, do they see injustices in their community, however they define their community, and what can they do about it? And then there's this idea under critical consciousness of efficacy. Do they feel confident that they can do what it is they need to do? Do they know how to navigate institutions that they're in, whether it's the educational, the system of education, whether it's at home, whether it's community organizations? Do they feel confident that they can engage in political activity, in social activity, and feel confident that they have the abilities to do what they need to do. And finally, it's action. They need to take action. So for me, social justice breaks down into equity, agency, and the development of critical consciousness. And these are the three areas that are very important to me when talking about social justice.
And all important points. So a lot there. Now let's get to what you're talking about, the practical point of it. So when it comes to education and it comes to particularly our educators, what does social justice look like for them in their practice?
Well, for me, and I do teach education. I'm an adjunct at McDaniels, and we teach a course, or I teach a course that looks at reflection, being a reflective instructor or a reflective educator. And I think that with educators, and I'll say adults in general, but educators more specifically, it really begins with being reflective. Who am I? What is my social consciousness? What biases am I coming into the classroom with? What are my blind spots? And how do I adjust those blind spots? Because I have to be clear here. I have an issue with folks when they say, I don't have any biases. We all do. And it makes us uncomfortable when we face those biases. But I think when we adjust, when we reflect, and we just take time to be still, we find out that there's area for growth there. So I think that when we talk about social justice for educators, we need to start with self and understanding how we enter spaces and where are our blind spots, because ultimately our blind spots end up shedding light in front of our students when we teach, because they see the things that we do, they hear the things that we say, and oftentimes we do say things that are offensive, that may exclude, that may marginalize, and we don't realize we're doing it, and we're not being intentional when we do it. But flipping it back on the student perspective, if they have the power and the efficacy to question a teacher, they can make a teacher aware of when they're doing X, Y, and Z that may be inappropriate, that may make them feel uncomfortable. But we as educators, we need to understand that we're human, and we have these blind spots and we have these biases. And I think that in order to engage in social justice, we need to be reflective first and foremost.
And you said, in kind of your definition of social justice, particularly as it pertains to education, you mentioned student voice and then that efficacy piece. And you kind of pieced it together there and essentially saying, that we're kind of teaching students to challenge the system that they're a part of education, right? So how as we offer more student voices, educators, how can we then allow them, how can we stay within ourselves as these students grow a voice? Because we're seeing that more and more now in education.
So what's your question?
So the question is, as students begin to challenge more, and essentially just challenging, education more and kind of how they see things, how can we handle that as teachers and manage that and really support the students through that learning process?
Yeah, you support it by number one. When I design my lesson plans, like I said, they're all student-centered, right? And being student-centered means that I also have to engage in the world that they're involved in. The educational system, we are one of these archaic systems that have a very difficult time changing, right? We're still based on the agricultural schedule. We still, organize our students, based on age and what we think of these different levels. We move them around like they're in a factory, so that industrial age type of education is still happening, and it's archaic. And I think that our way of thinking about education also, teacher being the end all be all in the classroom, we are the bearers of knowledge, and we are there to impart all this knowledge on our students. When in fact, they come into the classroom, they come into these spaces as human beings with their own knowledge, with their own cultural capital that we tend not to value the way that I think that we should, but we're not trained to do that. And so for educators, we have to be cognizant of that. And we have to allow students to tell their stories, to honor their stories, and to make their stories, their narratives, part of what we're teaching. And I ask teachers, how often do students see themselves in the lessons that you're teaching? And we have to be aware that when we are locked into a strict curriculum, because I do have a lot of leeway because I teach electives, so I have a lot of leeway to shape my curriculum, to shape my lessons. But I've also taught, AP, I've taught our core courses where you are locked into a specific curriculum. And many teachers are afraid to deviate from that locked in strict curriculum. But we have to be able to step outside of that, step outside of our comfort zone, be uncomfortable and be okay with that and take chances. Because if you don't take chances, you don't grow and your students don't grow. And I always say it's like a slow death happen, right? When you continue along these lines, and especially for my teachers that know and feel that what they're teaching is really irrelevant to the students that they teach, yet still they're afraid to step outside of that box and take chances. You got to be uncomfortable. There's no easy way around it.
All right. Yeah, that was the best answer right there. And that's essentially what this is about. So definitely kudos to the work that you do and the knowledge that you bring off into the part of the conversation. So I'm going to lighten it up just a little bit because you have such a colorful, body of work here. And I particularly want to talk about, especially as I kind of have some health and physical educators listening, your hip hop history, in particular hip hop culture class. So how, tell us about the design of that, and do you implement that, or some of those ideas in the curriculum that you're talking about?
Absolutely. So I designed this course, hip hop history and culture, and I have to be clear that this is not a music class, right? A lot of people think that's all we do. They come in here and we talk about rap music. Sure, we deconstruct lyrics. We do that. But essentially what this class is, I always say it's like a Trojan horse, because hip hop culture for me was like a Trojan horse in terms of getting me to be reflective and question things and learn. And I hate to say this, but it wasn't schooling that really got me into reading, to delving deeper into social issues. It was hip hop culture. So it was me listening to Chuck D and KRS-One, and all these other seminal hip hop artists, Rakim, Queen Latifah, that got me thinking outside of the classroom. And it was hip hop that got me into education. This is a second career for me. And so this class is really social commentary through the lens of young Black and brown people who develop hip hop culture. And so we learn all kinds of things in this class, dealing with, poverty, structural racism, gender inequality, rape culture. We talk about all these different issues through the lens of hip hop culture. So while they're coming in the class, they're getting information about hip hop, they're also learning about themselves, but also the society they live in and what they can do to make change. So all the things that I talked about earlier, this class is really a culmination of all those things. It's like baking a cake. Hip hop is just the finished product. Hip hop is that chocolate cake, but the ingredients that go into it, all the things we just talked about, are part of this class. And you can't just pull out the eggs, you can't pull out the chocolate flavoring, right? It's all baked in together. And so, this course, so for example, I teach the course this afternoon, and we've been talking for a week now, and we haven't even mentioned hip hop and hip hop culture. Right, we're looking at geography and the cultural development of hip hop in different parts of the country. So right now we're doing geography, we're doing social economics of particular cities. We're looking at major industries that develop cities and how these hip hop artists grow up in these certain environments. We're not even talking hip hop right now. We're talking city design, right? And all these other social issues that go along with it. I feel like I'm talking too much, man.
No, listen, I want a big smile on my face because as I'm hearing it, I'm really thinking about how teachers had to adapt in the past school year, with the pandemic happening, they really had to start looking through technology and what are kids using and how can we capitalize off the things that they're using, particularly TikTok, right? And TikTok is now a part of the culture. And how can we use those kind of platforms to better deliver our content, especially for health and physical educators using that content to get students active. So no, I pinpointed that because I wanted to hear kind of what that was and the the aspects of it, because it definitely relates to what's happening in the classroom. It's using the culture to teach students, and that goes to the culturally responsive teaching part that you've been doing so well. So the last question I then want to ask about is, for teachers, for educators, how can they begin to build culturally responsive practices in their classroom setting?
All right, to go back to what I said earlier, be reflective, right? Don't be afraid to be reflective. Understand, admit, be comfortable knowing that you have certain biases as well. Let's face that. Find a community, find a tribe, find a network of people that are doing this work as well. You know, and one thing that I learned that really forced me to learn over this pandemic when we were in isolation is that I had to find ways to find other people in our community that were outside of my school building, outside of my district. So while I didn't really care too much for this platform, Zoom, with my students, I did learn how to connect and to find other individuals that were doing this work all around the country. Build your team, build your network of support. There are a lot of people out here that are doing this work, right? So I would encourage teachers to find out who's doing this work, how do you connect with them, continue to build with them. And then ask your students, talk to your students about things they would like to see in the classroom. How would they like to be taught? What are some things they would like to be implemented? And I say ask them and then listen. Be still, listen to them, honor their voices. And Sean, you raised a good point, you know, in terms of using technology. We're always trying to, and you know, it's a fight for me as well, telling students to put their phones down, right? Because I'm in high school. They live, they breathe that cell phone. But I've also had to learn how to incorporate, you know, Instagram and Twitter. We do Twitter campaigns, we do IG campaigns in my classroom. Haven't gotten on TikTok yet, but it's forced me, because what I also learned is that a lot of the writing that they do, when I ask them how they learn about certain topics, a lot of them talk about they learn through TikTok. That blew my mind, because I know TikTok is, you know, these short snippets of videos, but they're learning about a lot of these concepts that we talk about through TikTok. I don't even know what that looks like, but I know that I have to engage in that world to understand where they're coming from. So for teachers, get involved in their worlds. You know, part of their world is social media. I wasn't a Twitter, I wasn't an IG user, but I started to use it because I had to understand the feel for it. You know, what does it feel like? What does it feel like to get a like or not get a like, you know, for something that you post? That impacts them. You know, I had to dive into that world to really understand where they were coming from. How do I design lessons where they can actually pull out their cell phones and use them in class? And when you talk about hip hop culture or just youth culture today, that's essential to who they are. You know, I'm an old head, you know, my students know that. And so they're patient with me. They teach me how to engage in this kind of work. And so, you know, I would say this, teachers, find your tribe, be reflective, include students in the conversation, ask them questions, but just listen to them and receive.
Thank you so much. And on that note, we would like to thank Kenneth M. Smith. He goes by Kenny. You can follow him. Speaking of socials, you can follow him on Twitter and IG at Mr. Smith Inspires. That is at Mr. Smith Inspires. Thank you so much, Kenny. National Board Certified Teacher in Montgomery County's Washington Post Teacher of the Year in the year 2018. Thank you so much for having this conversation. And thank you all. For sure. And want to thank our Shape America Equity, Diversity, Inclusion Committee, and then also Shape America for allowing this platform and creating this space for us to have these conversations. And as Shape America stated back in 2020, the reason why we have to do these and have these conversations, because as educators, we must do even more. Thanks for listening and take care.
That's what's up. Peace to everybody.